Alright, it's time to wrap up talking about the shaman. Hello everyone, and welcome back down here to the Gamer's Den with me, your host, Jordan, your master of lore and storyteller extraordinaire, here to wrap things up for the first edition Pathfinder Shaman, talking about the overall strategy and tactics for this build, as well as my final thoughts on this class. And damn, it's a bit of a doozy. I mean, the Shaman really is a class that is just so ultimately flexible with how you can build it, depending on the kind of spirits you want to go for, how you allocate your stats, the ancestry that you pick out for your character, your feat selection, on and on and on. Everything can mix and match in so many incredible ways that you're probably going to want to think things out a little bit ahead of time. Not that you want to power game it, but the only real pitfall I see with this class is you can potentially be good at everything, so if you try to be good at everything, you might end up being okay at everything instead. So in order to avoid stretching yourself too overly thin, I think it's a good idea to have an idea ahead of time of what you really want to lean into with your shaman. And really, humans, half-elves, and half-orcs provide a really stable starting point towards doing that, particularly since they all share the same favorite class bonus of getting extra spells off of the cleric spell list that is not already on your spell list as a shaman. Does a lot to greatly expand your repertoire and addresses, or at least helps to address, one of the biggest weaknesses of the shaman class, that being their spell list. It's consistently rated as one of the weakest, if not the weakest, out of all the full spellcasting classes. But that shouldn't lead you into thinking that you're a weak spellcaster. I mean, you're a full spellcasting class. You're getting access to 9th level spells, and as we've seen, some of those spells are staggeringly terrifying in their scope and power. So, it's not that you're just lacking in a little bit of variety, so having the option to expand your spell list from any source, including the cleric, is going to be useful and helpful. So that's just something to bear in mind there. And with this particular build and guide that we've gone with, we're definitely planning on leaning into our spell casting a fair bit more. Though, if you do want to go for a more melee-centric build, then the half-orc is probably going to suit you just fine, because you start off with bonus proficiencies in great axes and falchions. And falchions in particular are what I'd go with, just the expanded critical threat range that's going to let you consistently do extra damage. But the great axe does have to be said, when it does crit, it's going to crit hard with that ×3 damage multiplier. So it's something worth thinking about. And since we're going to be leaning into spellcasting quite a bit more, I'd have to really highly recommend going with the Heaven Spirit. It gets some interesting bonus spells. The class or the spirit abilities that you get, the manifestations and the like, really help, particularly for the human, where you unlock the ability to be able to see in darkness with dark vision, including supernatural darkness. And if you're already playing, say, a dwarf who already has dark vision, then you're going to expand your dark vision out another 30 feet. So all the way around, even if you go with that as your option, you are going to be getting a benefit for most of the different kinds of characters that you could be playing. And then your hex selection overall is also nothing to sneeze at. Hexes are just such a great benefit for any of the classes that get them, like the Witch. I mean, the Witch is what they stemmed from in the first place. I mean, being able to throw out things like Misfortune, where you force the target to make a will save, or on failure for 1 round anytime they make an ability check, an attack roll, saving throw, or skill checks, they have to roll twice and take the worst result. Even though you're picking that up at 2nd level if you're following this guide, that's something that's going to be a staple for you even up into the higher levels. That's going to be very, very useful. Oh, I should also, before we get too much further into hexes, your secondary spirits, which ones you decide to bond with on that day-to-day basis, are really, it's just really gonna depend. I mean, the life spirit, specifically restoration, is probably going to be a pretty solid, pretty reliable staple for you to make use of, just because you're in an adventuring career. Adventurers famously do not have the safest of occupations, so being able to touch up your allies, heal them up, make sure that they're okay and ready to go back into the fight, always going to be useful. But there are still going to be situations where even spirits that maybe aren't the best in terms of their raw mechanics and rules, or just so situational, sometimes those situations might come up and you might find a great deal of benefit. So being able to swap out that secondary spirit option is going to be useful for you. Really adds into that level of flexibility that you already enjoy. And now going back to hexes and the like, doing things like chant to help extend the effects of certain hexes is just going to be useful, especially if you're debuffing an opponent. But don't forget that you also have options like fortune, which I think we set for 10th level if I'm remembering right. I've been pressing buttons to try to find what I'm looking for and glance at it out of the corner of my eye, and I'm struggling. But fortune coming in at 10th level, being able to provide a boon and a benefit to your allies, letting them re-roll the checks that go for misfortune is still going to be useful, and it's going to be a great buff to have, again, up until the higher levels, even if you make it all the way to the mythical level 20 status. So that's something to bear in mind as well as you go along. And as far as your feat selection and stuff, again, since we are going with a spellcasting build, we have our classics like improved initiative. Picking up toughness is just going to be useful because as a shaman, especially with your hexes being such a shorter range kind of ability, you're going to be closer into a fight, so having toughness is going to be useful for you. Plus 3 extra hit points at first level and an extra hit point at each level thereafter is going to do a lot to extend your longevity. But you also have things like a cursed hex coming in at 3rd level, which lets you use hexes that are normally limited to 1 use every 24 hours against a single target to do so against that same target again. That's going to be great for really punishing your opponents. And then you have abrupt hexes and voracious hexes letting you affect multiple targets, and being able to make your hexes into swift actions. It's just going to really combo and synergize together really, really nicely. And when you pick out your targets for your hexes, you're really going to ruin their day and make those opponents so ineffective. I ran an opponent myself against a party that included a witch, and they used the Evil Eye and Misfortune hexes, and I was constantly having to re-roll, taking penalties while they did their cackling and extended the duration of the hexes. It just was an absolute mess and a nightmare. The big bad at the end of that particular adventure just was relatively ineffectual. So being able to do this, I know from first-hand experience, can be staggeringly powerful. Absolutely great to have. Now, I've talked a bit before about spells and the like, and how I'm not a fan of evocation or blasting spells. But I've got to say, my stance has been changing a bit the last year and a half or so. I don't think it's as ineffective as it used to be, particularly with the different kinds of meta magic feats like Dazing Spell. Sure, Dazing Spell does add in a +3 level increase, so if you're shooting a 4th level spell and you prepare it with Dazing Spell, it goes up to a 7th level spell slot. That's not the best, but then again though, if you're hitting multiple targets and they all have a chance to become dazed, that's great to have. It makes your evocations, your blasting, your offensive spells that much more effective. I still think buffing, debuffing, and battlefield control are going to be more useful for you, but these kinds of feats and even rods that mimic these feats, like the Dazing Rod for example, can make blasting spells incredibly much more viable. Same thing for the Cherry Blossom spell, which living creatures that take damage from the spell also take 2 points of damage to strength, dexterity, and con, or intelligence, wisdom, and charisma. And that's pretty huge in and of itself right there, reducing their statistics overall, their attributes. That's incredible. If you're affecting the mental scores, you're low, and you're hitting a spellcaster, you're lowering their spellcasting stats. you're reducing the save DCs. I mean, that's amazing. That's absolutely incredible to have. And no fighter type class wants to take a penalty to their strength and constitution. And throw in dex there on top of it is just staggeringly powerful. Abundantly great. So many different adjectives that I could throw out there. Overall, though, the Shaman class just offers a whole bevy, a complete suite of options and abilities for you. And we haven't even gone in to start talking about your spell selection yet. I mean, your spell selection could vary day to day, and the fact that you have the flexibility to do so as a prepared spellcaster to, from day to day, adjust and select different spells is only going to lean into that aspect of being such a flexible and adaptable class. Really, the Shaman is kind of terrifying just with the array of selections that you have in front of you. I don't know that I would recommend this class for first timers just because there's so much to weigh and consider, so many ways to play with it, but for anybody that's gotten comfortable playing in a tabletop game, whether you're coming in from 5th edition or have been a Pathfinder veteran but just never touched the class, I'd say you're probably going to be pretty comfortable getting into this. Pick a selection ahead of time of what you want to be great at, and then see what else you can make yourself good at. Potentially, if you're rolling for stats, you could be a great spellcaster, and then, good to kind of good at combat, and then use your spells and your hexes to really start rounding out your combat abilities for when you get into the thick of things. Especially if you go with the Bone Spirit. Bone Spirit had some interesting options for combat in particular. But what do you think? Go on down to the comments below. Did you like today's video? Did you dislike it? What are some other thoughts that you might have for the Shaman, and in particular for this guide overall? I think I've made it clear where I land on this. This is a great class. It's got some really flexible options. I think you are still pretty well served going as a full spellcaster and just leaning into that aspect, but certainly it's not the only way to go. Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below, and remember, if you're new here to the channel, go on down there, hit the subscribe button, and become a regular member here at the Gamer's Den. But with all that said, I've been your host, Jordan, your master of lore and storyteller extraordinaire. Thank you all so very much for your time, and you all have yourselves a good night.